Thank you, Rasmus. So in our session, we had four presentations. The first of which was by Juan Carlos Leal on a comparison of the carbon footprint of polyester and natural resins. The second presentation by Uwe Fritsche was very much focused on land use change and was a kind of, let's say, the main theme of our session in the end was how to include land use change in our assessments and reporting on products. Henk followed this with, well, some similar themes, but also a kind of audience, let's say lots of audience participation and some dilemmas that you face when developing chemicals from natural materials and dilemmas around the sustainability of these materials. And finally, the last presentation by Michael Spielman on the development of a product category rule for green coffee. So in terms of the general opinions coming back from the session, and this is just a list of questions or insights, and so not answers, but just to give a flavour of the feeling of the group. There was one conflict which was observed that sometimes a commercial secrecy is in some way conflicts with full reporting. So you can conduct a carbon footprint assessment. You can determine yourself. You can look at that internally and analyse the environmental footprint of your product. But there's a limit to how much you can report, and you know how constructive you can be in terms of the general debate. These are other questions which are very common. So, for example, is deforestation due to soya production? Do we have enough land to produce crops used for bioplastics? How do we deal with food versus fuel? So what's the... and how does that relate to... So can we have, for example, aligned methods to assess food, fuel, and different agricultural products? And there was a strong feeling from the views coming back that we have to find a way to consider direct and indirect land use change in the methodologies to assess environmental impact of products. There was also a feeling that the methods often sound, if you like, too theoretical, and that to an outsider that becomes quite unintuitive. And so that to make methods work in practice, in order to identify sustainable practice, you need to have really practical methods, and that we could perhaps be more focused on making sure that the methods are practical. And that was a similar one to the last point there, that is, how do we convert our knowledge and our understanding from LCAs into reducing carbon footprints? Now this last picture is kind of, I take responsibility for this, and it was after the dinner as well, so there might be some... These things sometimes look good when you make them and not so good afterwards, but I guess what the feeling was that there could be at least two reasons. Okay, it's not too bad. Yeah. Two main reasons for doing this quantification through LCAs. So and they might not be mutually exclusive, but they can lead to different methods and results. So the first is to actually assess and improve environmental performance, and the other is more in relation to reporting. So how do you demonstrate environmental performance and then access markets? And the approach might differ, and I think the feeling was that the first step of LCAs is valuable in all cases, so scoping it out and trying to assess what you want from the exercise. I think then it might diverge. So the kind of route that my impression was, the route we saw yesterday was that you go then to an attributional LCA and you do all the rigorous method, and then that may result in labelling and something that you can report credibly to consumers. On the other hand, is there any reason that for business-to-business communications or for the more informed people, we can't actually report, in addition to the numbers for the functional unit that we've decided, we can't additionally report figures for estimated direct land use change and indirect land use change. And those would be kind of, if you like, rigorous reporting methods. And are they absolutely necessary for assessment of sustainable practice? So internally, if you're not looking to compare with peers necessarily, if you're just looking at your own supply chains and products, and you might adopt a different method having scoped it out. So you can do, for example, in that case, a hotspot analysis, get a good idea of the main impacts. Don't worry so much about double counting or getting the last few percent. and develop, if you like, decision support methods or tools for internal use. Now, I think I did. Let me just check if I did have something, a final note to say on that. No, I think that's it.
In the dedicated track number 2 on alternative, and I would put that in like, what is it called? I always forget, like a bit weakened that perhaps alternative approaches to assessing sustainability in value chains. And what we did is we learned a bit more about 3 different approaches that are developed and used in out there to actually manage sustainability of value chains, or at least get to tackle these challenges and opportunities. And what we looked at was one generally environmentally extended input-output models, which have been around for quite some time, but we also see some new developments around that, so we talked about that a bit. A second one was based on this general input-output approach to modeling, and also supporting it a bit with a more detailed LCA approach, so like finding a hybrid method, but building on that actually to put another layer in of natural capital valuation. So putting really monetary figures to the environmental impacts that were found through input-output models or hybrid approaches, and then really displaying, well, what are the environmental costs associated with companies, or in this case, even particular products. And the third approach that we learned more about was is the HIG index from the Sustainable Apparel Coalition that Karin Ekberg from Adidas introduced. And I don't want to go into a lot of the details of these approaches, but what I would like to do is to highlight just some points that came up. And I think these are very obvious, and it's especially the conclusion afterwards, I think, that we could sink in a bit, as it may help us through like all of the further discussions. So what we know is like environmentally extended input-output models, this was commonly perceived also in the group, can really help to have an efficient screening, like a first step into better understanding value chain impacts, not just greenhouse gas emissions, all kinds of impacts, and that this can cater for specific objectives, specifically those that are related to like really getting a first handle of what is really happening before going into further details. And some of the challenges that were mentioned, especially related to the granularity of approach. Of course, input-output models are more general. They make use of like statistical models, like from economies, to say, okay, well, what is the contribution to certain environmental impacts of certain sectors, different sectors, and relate back to that in assessing like certain companies or perhaps also products, in this case, companies. And so this is kind of the main challenge also. You have to be aware of the granularity of the approach, and also that you really work with a lot with secondary data, not specific data from your supply chain. So some of the challenges mentioned were it's difficult to track measures, to actually implement measures, to really use it to drive change in a particular value chain. But as a first step to understanding, okay, where should I put my focus on, and do that in a very efficient manner, that may really provide an interesting approach. One thing that I found interesting in that group was that, input-output models have been discussed in relation to LCA for a long time, but there seem to be some new developments also in terms of data availability, models around input-output analysis to actually improve these. I mean, we had this discussion, use phase integration, for example, which is still difficult to tackle, but it's done and approached, and there are also other models that actually improve these. So I think it's worth to kind of revisit this approach also to getting a first-hand experience or insight on value chains, and make use of it where it can really help. The second approach on natural capital valuation, or the input-output model, that was presented by Moritz Nill from Sustain, I should mention that. And the natural capital valuation was then presented by Steve Bullock from TrueCost. And they're like putting monetary terms to really environmental impacts. We in the group, I saw like two main advantages of that. One was that it really gives a feeling for materiality. So if you are able to have, with good models and good valuation techniques, to really put in a euro or dollar figure on impacts, you can immediately relate kind of to the extent of perhaps importance of different impacts that you look at. Of course, there are a lot of modeling questions underneath, and a lot of kind of assumptions that need to be made, but if you have like this complete overview, it can help to understand, okay, where is there really a lot of the impact coming from, or how do different impacts compare. And a second one, which I found very interesting, was as a value that it actually provides an opportunity to integrate different disciplines on this issue, because it may be easier for a lot of people to relate to monetary terms than to kilograms of CO2 or I don't know what. So it actually can enhance communication between very different people and departments like on the same issue. Even if you then go deeper and relate back to actual quantified then numbers behind it, but it is an option for enhanced dialogue, it can be. But as I said, it very much depends on detailed models that you have to be sure are a correct representation of reality, as much like depending on the objectives you have. And also one specific challenge that was noted, that it may be with the existing models a rather human-centric approach, because a lot of the environmental impacts in monetary terms are related back to health impacts for humans, and others are more difficult to actually account for. So this is like also like a bias that we have to take into account. The third one was the Higg index, presented by Karin Ekberg, which is, we learned, like more like a checklist, integrating all kinds of possibilities and also evidence on the environmental performance of products, in this case in the textile and apparel industry, and thereby provides like a quite comprehensive approach to looking at all the possibility, all the possible impacts and options also for reduction. So it's also looking at, okay, what can I do as a measure to improve well, certain material sustainability or similar. And just quickly mentioned, this is under development. It's rather within the industry used to really work on improving the sustainability within, like inside faced, not yet consumer faced. And there are some challenges noted, like it very much at the moment depends on self-assessments. So how do you control like responses to these checklists to really make sure that that you have an accurate representation. Also, there was this question: okay, well, how do you really make sure that the checklists you have, that they are kind of covering the important issue, and that you also weigh them in an appropriate manner, so that you really address materiality in a good manner. So that is quite important with the checklist to see, okay, well, how do you make sure you really put weight on the important issues and may not lose or may lose sight, like when you address all equally. So main insight that I took, or like Matthias Finkbeiner summarized it for us yesterday, and I think he's very right. I think not a new insight, but I think it's very well to take it into account. Because in the group also, the discussion was immediately going, oh, this approach will not work, so the other one is better. And, or, well, you cannot do that. Why do you think input-output model will never be like a good representation of like the organization or product sustainability? And vice versa. I mean, all of these approaches really have their weaknesses, but they also have their strength depending on the specific objectives that are there. And I think this is quite interesting to take into account when moving forward, to really say, okay, well, where may these approaches really add value, not as an alternative. That's why also now, it's not, I would change the session title now, it's not alternative approaches to assessing sustainability, but it's really thinking about, okay, at what point in the decision management process does it really make sense to apply these as a more efficient manner to achieve certain objectives? And I think that's quite important for our discussion. And yeah, with this, I would like to give on the microphone to the next speaker.
So, good morning. My name is Jan Christian, and I chaired the track Carbon Footprinting for Beginners yesterday. And yeah, it was the first time at the PCF World Forum that we did such a track, that we tried to also address more specifically persons who are new in this topic. And we were quite curious, like how this will be accepted, or if there would be many interested people coming to this track. And because we were taking a look at the list at the beginning, and we saw like, okay, most of the people who are coming, they're already experts in this field. But then, fortunately, when we started the track, the room was filling up. And yeah, when we had the introduction round, we found out, okay, there are some new people like who are really new in the topic and want to gather like a basic insights and find out, is this topic relevant for me? Isn't it too complicated to be implemented at my organization or at the things I do? And then there were also lots of people who were really experts, but they just wanted to know, what are the questions the people have? Like, what are the basic questions, and maybe what are the even unsolved questions that we still have in this topic? Because we're already here in the 8th PCF World Summit, and maybe some topics get a little bit out of sight because they have been talked about, like in the first summits or in the beginning of the PCF discussion, and but then other topics evolved, and maybe some topics like got a little bit in the background. So from the people who were like new in the topic, one of their main questions were like, okay, I do a PCF, but yeah, how can I communicate it to the consumer? And this is really a question which many initiatives take care about, but it's still, it's not working for everybody, like for not all the consumers still, and there are still some challenges to be tackled. And so Alexis Girard from Intertech, he summarized like what kind of communications to the consumer do we have, and I think he did it in a quite good way, because he was referring to an example of Frostup. They were showing their way of communicating, and then people were asking like, okay, you're doing a PCF, but you don't talk about it, so why do you do it? And then Alexis summarized it like, okay, there are 3 ways of communication. One way is to say, we are good because we did a PCF and we think we are good. And then there's another way, you get certified, your PCF, and then others say you are good, or you just do it, and let's decide the audience or the consumer, like if you're good or not, what they think. So communication was really one of the main topics we were talking about, and then I think it was really good that we had like some case studies there, so that people who are new in this field could see that PCF is actually working for them. and that it can be implemented, that it can lead to improvements in carbon emissions or like in carbon emission reductions, and that it's not just a science topic that we discussed, that it's already implemented. So I think there were many questions left we couldn't answer in the end, because during the discussions always new questions were popping up, and the time was actually too short to really discuss. But I think the persons who are new in this field, they gathered, or they got a kind of an overview on how you can use it. Oh, that's my cell phone. Sorry.
Some more questions.
I will just try to ignore it. So I just will summarize it really quickly. Thank you, Roman. So the people who are new in this field, I think they got a pretty good overview on what is relevant, and if it's relevant for them, where they should have like a deeper insight. And the persons who are experts, I think they kind of got tipped to the point, like, okay, what is also relevant, what we kind of forgot about, or what we should take more care about. And I think for them it was also, they could gather some good insights for their future development of the topic. So I think we will do it again. It was a quite successful track, I would say. So thank you.